next morning, I get a call from the UPS guy on the scene saying, we can't deliver it. The recipient has expired. He's dead. He died.
Sarbacher?
Yeah, that came to him.
Give me chills. Wow.
The night he died. So the next day, I sat at my typewriter, wrote the whole story out. I put it in an envelope, and we weren't near. I was at my cabin in upstate New York, and we were not near FedEx, but UPS had just started overnighting, and so they were willing to come pick it up. So I called the UPS office, and they came along, and they picked it up to take it to Sarbacher. The next morning, I get a call from the UPS guy on the scene saying, we can't deliver it. The recipient has expired. He's dead. He died.
Sarbacher?
Yeah, that came to him.
Give me chills. Wow.
The night he died.
But that was after communion. This must have been 80.
No, it was
7 or
86. I believe it was 86.
Yeah, he died right around then. I thought he wrote to William Stein. Oh.
Well, it was while communion at that point was being created, and that I'm quite sure of the dates.
Wow. That's crazy. So what?
It was very scary, and I've.
Do you think it was related to your correspondence?
I have no idea. I was told later that he fell off his boat, and I know the UPS guy said he fell off his boat, and the death certificate says natural causes.
Well, the context around what was happening at this time is Sarbacher had just written a letter to William Steinman, who's another UFO researcher, who was actually an employee of Skunkworks, who got basically fired over his research around UFOs. And he was saying, yes, there was a program, and Von Neumann, Vannevar Bush, Oppenheimer were all involved. And he says these beings are like insects, they're very lightweight, and he talks about crafts and stuff. So maybe he was killed for running his mouth or something, because he was head of Washington National Labs, and David Grush has said on record that he set up UFO secrecy in 1954. And I know he was very close with Thomas Townsend Brown, who was a mid-century anti-gravity.
Who set up UFO secrecy?
Sarbacher, along with Oppenheimer.
Well, what's so fascinating about that is Sarbacher he talked about it very openly.
Well, that's the thing. I didn't realize he died like that. He was scrubbed from the internet. There is nothing on Sarbacher now. All you can see is a little memorial from, I think it's some Florida local magazine or whatever.
I know other people who are deep inside who are like that, who were had extraordinary lives, and now you can barely find them on the internet.
Like who?
Well, we're not going to go down that path. Let's keep talking about Sarbacher.
Do you think?
Well, maybe talking to me was a mistake. I was very frightened by it. I'll tell you that. And if you read Communion, you'll see my references to this, but I don't mention his name in Communion because I was scared to.
That was Sarbacher. Well, Sarbacher's son has now gone on record saying, my father told me that he used to put cameras on, modified versions of V2 rockets in order to chase UFOs. So
that has a familiar ring. He might have said that to me, actually.
Really?
I don't remember it directly, but it does have a familiar ring.
Well, that was more and more is coming out about Sarbacher, and Ross Coulthard has some interesting data points around some of the nuclear engineers, old timers that he's met with in Australia, knowing who Sarbacher was. Or I think Sarbacher even taking a trip out there because they had their Woomera nuclear test site.
Right.
And so there being some correspondence there. And so that's fascinating. You didn't realize.
For context, when we did the documentary with Grush last year, I asked him, there is one person that you can ask questions that can lay out, that can allow you to understand the architecture of the program. Who would it be? And he said it was Sarbacher.
How fascinating. Because Sarbacher spent a couple hours on the phone with me. So they knew what was happening to me.
Yeah.
They had to have known, or he wouldn't have done that.
Well, when Townsend Brown finally achieved a positive result with his anti-gravity experiments, this was in Paris. He flies back to the U.S. and Robert Sarbacher picks him up in his big Cadillac, and that's a noted by his daughter Linda and his historian Paul Shatskin, and so I think he seemed deeply involved in all this stuff, and he's written big textbooks. He was known for having an IQ of 200 plus, And I think having some correspondence with Einstein.
Sarbacher. Oh, yeah. He was obviously extremely smart, very quick.
Yeah.
And full of insight, by the way. And really, I think he did a lot of good in this
That must
world.
have been encouraging for you before communion was made to just know that you were.
Well, the first time I wrote it down was for him.
Wow.
Oh, and the UPS said, we'll send the thing back to you, but I never received it.
He's written a book too about ultra high frequency physics, which is basically, if you think about what happens at ultra high frequencies, that's the stuff that the National Science Foundation is now quietly admitting. Unfortunately, the necessary and only impetus that will allow us to release suppressed science is kind of game theory vis-a-vis other countries and national security. But they're now releasing this model of extended electrodynamics, which you could say people like Sarbacher were probably looking into in the 50s, because these were sort of microwave, really extremely, high up the electromagnetic scale, very short wavelengths that may have all sorts of weird effects, and explain a lot of the biological effects as well when it comes to UFOs. So,
well, that's very interesting. I haven't kept up with that. Let's get back though to Von Neumann.
Yeah.
Because, and parenthetically, on the way back to Von Neumann, he didn't tell me personally, but he told a member of my family, not Von Neumann, General Exon, that he had held, when the debris and bodies were brought into Air Materiel, he had held one of the bodies. And he said,
this is from the Roswell crash.
Yeah.
1947.
He said it was like a big insect.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's certainly my impression of them. Only they're not big. I mean, some of them are very small. Some of them are bigger, but that was that night when I woke up in that room, my immediate thought was, my God, bugs, huge bugs. And that's why I thought I was having a nightmare, because I came to this with no idea it could happen. Now let's get back to Von Neumann. Von Neumann, there's two things. There's the Von Neumann machine, which is, he postulated a machine that would replicate the species that built it and would then move around the galaxy looking for planets that it could seed. What if that's what we have here? Only Von Neumann, in his, I don't recall if it's in very much detail in the writings he did about this, but he does mention that something like that over vast amounts of time would inevitably have a certain amount of deterioration of its memory. What if what we have here is something that was programmed to seed planets like this, but not programmed to find someone else, because they had as much trouble as we're having finding other people and decided there weren't any. And so it arrives, it finds us and doesn't know what to do. And that's why we have this bizarre situation that, if you step back from the whole thing, it looks a little bit like an AI that has gone berserk. The Von Neumann machine could be an explanation for why this is so peculiar. Let me put it that way. But the other thing that Von Neumann, and you referenced briefly this paper earlier, there is supposedly a paper, and General Exon, who was no scientist but had been exposed to a lot of scientists involved in this and was very smart, tried to explain this to me. And of all the scientists who were involved in it, I thought he was most likely talking about something that Von Neumann would have thought up, would have conceived. There could have been other scientists involved in it that I don't know about, but the paper supposedly is just a couple of pages long, and if it even still exists, because a lot of this stuff is gone with the wind, I'm sure by now. And what it postulates is that if this presence is not from this physical universe, or even if it is, in order to become part of our reality where it does not exist in any way, it has to gain a deeper, within us, we have to come to a deeper realization of its reality. It has to be as real for us as we are to each other, as this is to us, as this is to us, as our world is. If it's not from our world, it has to break through into our reality by taking us not just to a level of belief in its presence, but to an assumption about its presence that is as basic as our assumption about the rest of the reality that we know.
Fascinating. How do we get our hands on that paper? Because we know on record that von Neumann, I mean, no scientist would dispute this. He entertained this idea that the mind is responsible for wave function collapse.
Yeah, that's exactly why I think he wrote the paper,
Mm-hmm.
precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And he explored that idea extensively. And so it would be something he would think of, definitely. And it is what he's talking about in the paper, I would assume, is an intervention in the process of the collapse of wave function by this other presence that alters the way the wave function collapses when we perceive.
So fascinating.
Yeah. Now, that would also explain, and I take this extremely seriously because I think we're talking about something real. You understand? I respect this belief. I think this paper existed.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it still does. And it's why when people are all angry about, the government won't disclose and so forth, I say, wait a minute. And they say, well, we're ready. And I say, no, we're not. We don't, because you say we're ready for it, but we don't know what it is.
That's
and
right.
Therefore, we are not ready. And here's the problem. And I wrote a short story about this, about von Neumann's death, called The Open Doors, about his fear that this is a door which opens in the mind and in the perceptual system and can never be closed. So once the door is open, once we have accepted them into our reality, we can never get rid of them. We can never tell them, no, it turns out we don't want you here because we don't like you and we don't like what you're doing to us. We can't do that. The door opens only once and only in one direction and forever. Now, if that isn't a motive to hide this, to keep it secret, people scorn the Collins Elite. They say, well, they think it's demons and we're supposed to ignore demons and that's why they do. It might go a little deeper than that. It might be that this is a time right now where we have to be very careful about preserving our dominion of our reality and to think of this in some new ways. What do we do right now if we are going to let them into our reality? And I think ultimately we have to, but on our terms.